Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Clyde Sharadi, and welcome to African Knowledge here at Africa Media Australia. We're very happy to know that this show is attracting a lot of interest in the community as we as we offer a platform for many African professionals, leaders, community advocates, and just a general member of the community to be able to share their skills, their knowledge, their insight and wisdom on any number of things. So again, we just remind those who have contacted us previously that you want to come and share something with the community. It's all good. Just contact us through the details and that we provide on our Facebook page or our website, and we'll be able to invite you. Now, today we're talking about vaccine safety and traveling overseas in this time of lockdowns and all that sort of thing. You may remember, if you've been watching, that about 4 weeks or so ago, we received two medical doctors of African background who talked to us about COVID. They were advocating for the vaccine. And today we thought we would get somebody who maybe hold a different view in relation to that, because our role here at Africa Media Australia is not to be either pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine. It is about enabling people to have an open discussion about the pros and cons. People have reasons to vaccinate themselves, and other people have reasons where they think that they should not vaccinate. It's not up to us to tell people what to do. So we will talk more about this topic, but for now, let me just put my introduction, and we'll be back in a few seconds. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we're talking about vaccine safety, and my guest tonight is Samuel Tshisekedi. I should actually say Reverend Samuel Tshisekedi, because he's a leader of a church in Bendigo, Victoria. Reverend Samuel, how are you tonight? You
I
actually
am,
in Kinshasa. It's day over there, isn't it?
yes, I am indeed in Kinshasa, and it is daytime over here. We're close to midday.
Okay, thank you very much. So, for those, let me just say that Samuel is in Kinshasa, the capital city of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He's traveled overseas with his family, and but he normally lives in Bedigo, where he runs a church. So, Reverend Samuel, tell us about your trip from Bendigo, from Victoria to Kinshasa. How is that going?
The trip is good, but when we were traveling, it was because I'm a regular traveler, and this particular trip presented a number of challenges, trying to make sure that we comply with all the COVID rules of different countries,
Hmm.
and so on and so forth. So we had to get a COVID test from a PCR test that should be negative within 72 hours of arriving in the Congo, and with Kenya, it had to be within 96 hours of arriving in Kenya. So different countries got different rules, and we had to go via Doha. So we went Melbourne to Doha, Doha to Nairobi, and Nairobi to Kinshasa. And when we got to Kinshasa, we had to just present the result of which would be out in 24 hours. And after that, if the PCR was negative, then we could be going, wherever our businesses were concerned. So
Hmm.
no quarantine here in the Democratic Republic of the Congo for 14 days, for example.
Okay, we'll come back to your trip experience from Australia to the Congo in a moment. Now, I understand you are one of those people who do not feel that the vaccine is quite safe enough to take. Tell us more about that. What's your position on the vaccine?
Well, I want to preface this with because I'm somebody my background is theology. I've done international relations and I've done economics. But at the underpinning of all that is basically just philosophy, because I'm an apologist. So which
Mhm.
means somebody who present the defense of the gospel. And so you interact with philosophy all the time. I think before I say anything, I want to preface something that most people can dismiss a point of view just because they do what is called, appeal to authority. So, for example, you invited medical doctors. I am not a medical doctor.
Mhm.
I want to make sure that very clear. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a churchman. I'm a pastor, 25 years in ministry. And so I'm a community leader. But I want to say that, to approach any and every topic, people don't need to be expert in that particular field.
Mhm.
There is something that is called a rational right. You have a reasoning brain, a reasoning mind, and so you can look at the information that has been presented from either side and ask necessary questions to see and weigh which side of the argument seems to be a lot more convincing. And so when I'm going to approach this question, somebody might say, but no, well, he's not a medical doctor.
Mhm.
All I can, we can appeal to expert testimony when it is required or when it's needed. I will do that. But my conclusions are, as a rational person, if somebody wants to sort of hear and engage with my comments, they must hear and engage with the rationality I provide, the premises I have, that leads me to the conclusion. And if they could knock those premises out, instead of just simply saying, you're not an expert in the field, therefore you must be dismissed. So in that
Mhm.
sense, it's as though we give a blank check to the expert without having even to question them. See, this is what used to happen with religion in the past. I'm
Mhm.
a churchman, and people used to just simply believe whatever the minister said at the pulpit without questioning. And that led to all sorts of errors. And so we needed to avoid turning the expertise in either medical science or scientific inquiry itself into a religion that is unquestioned.
Mhm.
So I'm talking about this from from that medical perspective, and I will talk about it from our government policy perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Okay.
Absolutely. And it's good that you have prefaced your comments. And I totally agree that you don't have to be a medical specialist or a virus specialist or epidemiologist, whatever you call them, to give a view on any particular topic that concerns people obviously taking putting something in their body, which
Yeah.
may potentially have adverse effects, and
Yeah.
even though some argue that the chances of that are very slim. So that's all okay. We do understand your preface. Now, why have you not taken the vaccine? Try to share with us why you think you don't think you need to take the vaccine.
Well, I'll start with, I think, to be fair, I want to start with the inconsistency in the approach by our government, the way the government has dealt with this issue. So if I start with the policy side of things, then
Hmm.
I can move into, the medical side, and I will appeal to some expert testimony in a moment. Now, the first thing that I see as an inconsistency is that when the pandemic started, in especially starting from February 2020, we had no idea what was coming out of China. So every government around the world did not know exactly what to expect. So government officials started by saying, "Hey, look, we've got an issue that's coming. We don't know exactly what it is. We don't know how we are to deal with this. So let's agree with the population. Let's all agree to take some measures." That's how the prime minister prefaced it that way. So did the Victoria Premier, for example. Let's make sure that we stay social distance. Let's do some lockdowns so that we can flatten the curve, because of what we had noticed from the Chinese perspective, that the virus was very contagious and it had nefarious effects. So to not overwhelm our hospitals, we therefore needed to make sure that we diminish, or if you will, we stifle the spread of the virus.
Hmm.
And this decision was not, the government didn't come and say, well, look, we are the one who give you your freedoms and your liberties. And now that we have this crisis, we're going to take your freedom and liberties away, and we'll give them to you only when we're happy. or when we give you some measure. It wasn't like that. It started with, let's flatten the curve. And they appealed to the Australian community, with all of us, and we agreed that, okay, it was the best way to go because our government officials didn't have any idea what was coming our way. But then after the time, we've started to get data from all over the world. We started to get the information. We started to get the sequencing, the genetic sequencing of the virus. We started to find out that, yes, the virus affected people 65 years old and over, who mostly had comorbidity. That data on the TGA website has not changed at all. And so people who were younger were, not at the high risk. So the survival rate of people infected with the virus who were, under 65 and who were, able-bodied, the survival rate was 99. Even if you put it to 98%, and that is a very high survival rate. So, we expected that from that standpoint, the government would go, okay, now we know what this is. It is not as dangerous as we thought. Let's protect our most vulnerable. And so we protect our most vulnerable. Let everybody else, go about their own business. If they catch the virus, they will survive it. They will build natural immunity. This is how we have always dealt with the viruses of this kind. Now, it was called that this is a SARS-2. This is not the first time we're dealing with SARS viruses. People say, well, this is a novel virus. Well, no, this is a SARS-CoV-2. So it's a SARS-2. We've dealt with SARS before. And so I find the people who, when I'm going to talk about vaccine in a moment, who want to catch it both ways. When you say, well, the vaccine was developed too fast, they're like, well, no, we've been dealing with SARS for a long time and we've been developing the vaccine. So when we're saying, well, hang on a minute, well, this is not therefore a novel coronavirus, they're like, no, it's novel, but you can't have it both ways. So when we start to find out the information, the government therefore decided to continue lockdowns when it was no longer reasonable to do so. And so, and with that, as we get to this point, you start to hear saying, well, if you want us to go back to normal, in other words, we took your freedom away. It wasn't yours, now we're keeping it now. You have to do certain things before we can let you go free again. And so from being a student of political science, all the data of political science we have has always come to one conclusion. People's freedom, our social contract with government, is not as though government is benevolent in giving us our freedoms. The freedoms don't come from the government. Our constitution guarantees this freedom because these freedoms were natural freedoms. Okay? These freedoms were natural freedoms. And if it's the American Constitution, we say they come from God rather than from government. And suddenly we have a government that seems to say, we can lock you up. We can let you go free only when we want. And so the Victorian government would say, it's time for us to not lock down, but lock out. Okay? Lock people out. Okay, I mean, first of all, the government of Victoria is not that which will confer to us the freedoms we have. So from a policy point of view, that's the first thing. As a libertarian, I am thinking the government has basically walked in the territories that it shouldn't. We're starting to head toward totalitarianism that is uncalled for. So that's my exhibit number one.
Okay, but the government can argue that it's part of the responsibility to take whatever measure necessary to protect the broader community, especially when we're dealing with a disease that can potentially kill and has killed hundreds of thousands of people worldwide. And therefore, some measures are warranted, even though those measures are necessarily going to limit people's liberty.
Yes. Now, that's a fair point. Using a communitarian argument can very quickly turn into propaganda. I'll show you how this works. Number one, if there is a matter that concerns the entire community, when the government makes those measures, the first thing the government does is to lay out convincing argument to everyone within the community. Why? Because the government doesn't own our freedom. People are free because of natural law. We are free because of natural law. The reason for government was for the organization of society so that we could have laws. And our laws are passed because the government officials that are passing the laws were elected by the very people. The very people that the government is saying to protect are the very people that in our social construct in the West, we believe that people had the wisdom to elect their representatives. So if the same people had the wisdom to elect the member of parliament, and from, when then the party that's got the majority end up with the prime minister, it would be insulting to turn around and say to the same people, we don't think you have the capacity to make a decision about your own health, even though you have the capacity to make a decision to who's going to be looking after you. Do you see what I mean? Philosophically, it is absolutely inconceivable to say to the people, you're dumb enough, you can't actually think straight and be able to make decisions about your own health. And yet, where people do you selected, you had the wisdom to elect us, but you don't have the wisdom to be able to look after yourself.
Well, that's kind of a philosophical argument, which
exactly
is
right.
I would say I'm kind of playing the government side here just to get you
That's okay.
to provide your counter view. It's a philosophical argument that you are presenting, but on a practical level, they would say, well, not everyone actually in the community knows what are the right steps to take in terms of managing a pandemic. Therefore, it's the very reason why we have governments and a health system is to make sure that you have experts and people who know what they're talking about to help make the right decision that will protect the broader good.
Which is that's correctly right. Now, you see, I will be very, very balanced. The reason why our society was built as it is, it was because of our philosophical underpinning. Okay, it's our philosophical underpinning that made our society as it is. And if we don't take into account those philosophical underpinning, then decision can be made at the whim. For example, just jumping in, the premier of Victoria just decided that he was going to shut all the playgrounds. And he couldn't provide any expert advice that led to that particular decision. So once you remove the philosophical underpinning that the governor, the people who are governing us, have the duty toward us. This is why we're going to go to an election soon. They have a duty toward us. It's okay to have a expert testimony. It's okay to have expert point of view. But now it is the duty of the political leaders to turn around and to make their case to convince the population that this is for your own good. We do that even with our own kids at home. There's a level to which you can treat your children when they were still little. They can't really make judgment, which is, I think we've ended up with a nanny state that treats all of us as though we were brainless. And then when the day of the election come, then they're going to treat us as though we're capable of making decisions. What I'm saying is that when your children start to grow, you have people who are business leaders, community leaders, people who are the politicians that are making decisions, and the health authorities are not the only one who have capacity for rational thoughts. And not only that, any other expert witness that comes forward and to try to make their case, guess what the government is being doing? Shut them down. Big tech shut them down. They don't get given a voice. So from a policy perspective, you can therefore come to a conclusion something isn't right. Because if it was a matter of argument, you would therefore let the argument play out. The data need to be assessed, and so that people can come to the conclusion that the government decision that is being made is right. But if you start to squash the dissent, for example, if people who put their hand up say, well, this doesn't sound right because this, what we're looking at and the data we have doesn't lead to the conclusion upon which the policy is built, the government doesn't have to start squashing it. So I get what you're saying, that it is their duty to look after the people, but they must do the most important duty is to convince those people that the decision that is being made is for their own good, instead of using sheer power to say, we will lock you out of this, you will go without a job, we will kick you out of health system just because you have, and that is become basically dictatorial. Okay. I am happy for anyone, expert or otherwise, who wants to have a discussion about exactly why is the vaccine safe and what's the best, but don't do that. It's just simply you shut up and take the vaccine.
So
That therefore,
I guess you're saying whatever the expert advice the government can get, in the end, it comes down to a political decision
that's
that they are
exactly right.
making
Yeah.
in locking people down or
Yeah.
not, or whatever decision they take.
And the other thing, just on that note, why isn't the government releasing the advice, health advice from which these decisions are made? Okay. For example, the Victorian cabinet has not even been able to discuss within the council chambers to put to the member of the opposition to give them at least access to the health information and advice from which decisions are made. Our national cabinet had been taken to the High Court of Australia, so that by actually an Australian citizen like all of us, to try to squeeze them, they are appealing that decision. So to force them to basically put publicly the information upon which these decisions are made. And so these decisions are made in secrecy. Nobody knows what the health advice was to lock down playgrounds for the kids. And so if they put it out, then the community can assess that. But if they don't do it, just simply say, look, listen to the expert whose advice we're not going to show you. Just do what we say. It just become downright political.
Okay, let me remind those watching. You're watching African Knowledge on Africa Media Australia, and we're talking to Reverend Samuel Tshisekedi, who is presenting his views with regards to the COVID vaccine. He's more on the anti vaccine type as opposed to the pro vaccine type, and he's explaining why he is holding that position. If you have any question or any comment, please make your comment. We encourage you to do so, and we'll ask later on towards the end of the show. We'll ask Samuel to answer to some of your questions. Let me come back to you, Reverend Samuel. Now, explain to us why you are not taking the vaccine, even though
Okay.
the chances of adverse effect have been shown to be very little. Why you chose not to take it?
Well, so let's start where why am I choosing not to take the vaccine? Number one, my first objection is that the vaccine was developed hastily, and not only that, the emergency authorization by which the TGA had given to the Pfizer, for example, was given without our TGA, at least based on the information I have from the Freedom of Information Act that was filed with the TGA by a group of doctors, which I'm happy to provide to your show so that you can assess. Based on the information that were filed within Freedom of Information, the TGA, in answering the question that was asked whether the TGA had seen any patient-level data during the trial period by Pfizer, and the answer that the TGA gave in the file of Freedom of Information was that the TGA didn't see the patient-level data of the trial of the vaccine. That's number one. The second question was asked whether there was any trial that was done on women who were in gestational period, who were pregnant, to see whether there was any impact on the women who were pregnant. The TGA said that they didn't see any such data. It doesn't mean that it is not there, just the TGA didn't assess it, didn't see it. And the next question was asked, did the TGA have any committee of experts that sat down before the emergency authorization was given to assess all the information that was given? No such committee had gotten together. I'm happy to provide that Freedom of Information submission to your show. And so for me, our TGA is supposed to be rigorous in the way, especially when I'm not saying that the TGA does it perfectly all the time. There are times when medications have been, put out, and then we found out later on the long-term effect, and then those medications get withdrawn. But at least the TGA needed to do a due diligence to be able to assess the data that was provided by the vaccine providers. It seems to me that by authorizing in this emergency authorization, the due diligence wasn't done. That's number one.
Mm.
The second reason is that after while the emergency authorization was given, the vaccine providers sought to be immunized from being, pursued for to be able to pay indemnity to people who would be negatively affected
Mm-hmm.
by the vaccine.
Yeah.
Now, if the product was so safe, why would all the vaccine producers seek to be shielded from being pursued in case there was a negative effect? That second, I watched in a committee, Senator Jackie Lambie from Tasmania,
Yeah.
when the head of TGA was called before the Senate. And so she said, well, so you're saying that the government has given indemnity to, as immunize the vaccine producers from, being sued in case there was a negative effect. So I will go and tell my constituents that you take this vaccine. If something goes wrong, you're on your own. And the head of the TGA jumped up and said, well, you can't tell people that. Now, that footage has been all over the news media. I'm thinking, number one, due diligence by TGA is not done. Number two, the vaccine producers are shielded so that from the person who produces the vaccine to the person who injects it, if something goes wrong, that's it. The person who's gotten the vaccine is on their own. Oh, you see me?
Yeah, which means, I suppose what you're saying is they've given immunity to the vaccine producer, and the vaccine they're giving to people is not. I mean, basically, they tell you will get immunity from the vaccine, but they give immunity to the
vaccine
producer.
producers so that they can't be liable. Number three is that I listened to Dr. Robert Maloney, and I've just given two names. Maloney was the inventor of the mRNA vaccine technology. Okay, Robert Maloney. And Maloney had done a 3 hours interview, and I'm happy to provide the links. And so his conclusion was that the spike protein that had been put within the vaccine were supposed, because it's a synthetic mRNA. Okay, what is an mRNA? It's the messenger RNA. The messenger RNA duty and job is to take the information from your DNA. I'm not an expert in the field, but I've read expert material. So the duty is to take the information from your genetic code and then give instruction to the cells to turn that information into the building blocks of life, which is protein. So the synthetic mRNA technology takes that info, is introduced in the cell, and so it then sends the cell to produce, protein, but that are not directly an instruction from the genetic code from your DNA. That's why it's synthetic. So in that sense, my apologies there. In that sense, when the mRNA, synthetic mRNA was introduced in the body, when this research started to be done at the earlier stage, the body, our antibody system, the immune system recognized it to be an intruder, so it fought it. So they had to do a few tweaks in here until they could get it under the radar and be in the body. So that's the technology from which the vaccine is produced. Now, within the vaccine, what they did is they put the spike protein, which is the same kind of spike protein that the COVID virus, produces. See what I mean? And the idea, according to Dr. Robert Maloney, is that the spike protein was supposed to stay within the membrane of the cell. But then they discovered later on that it didn't. It crossed not only the cell, ended up in the blood, went all the way. Now, the information I'm providing, this is, they can't say, well, he's just saying that Robert Maloney has a 3-hour interview when he's talking about this. And so because of that, not only there's a spike protein started to get out of where it's supposed to stay, the consequences short term, we don't know as much, but most importantly, the long-term consequence of this synthetic mRNA, messenger RNA in the body, nobody has got such data. Nobody has got any such data.
So that means you don't trust what so-called government experts are saying in the news every day, that there's sufficient data showing the safety of the vaccine.
If you ask them, the time it takes to have a long-term study would be 3 to 5 years to be able to work out at least, that the long-term consequence. But now this vaccine came in just last year. No one has got any long-term. If somebody said they have a long-term study, they have to say how many years that study has been to be able to be comprehensive enough. We don't. In fact, our very health minister, the federal health minister, said it. I provided the quote where he said that we were engaged into the most extensive vaccine trial that has ever been done. This is from our federal health minister. I can provide to you the quote. So it is therefore to say that everybody knows this is a trial. But why would you therefore do this trial? And by imposing that people have to take the vaccine if they still have questions like I do, and not only that, and say, if you don't take it, we'll have these punitive measures. This is the last point, 4 points, last one. Dr. Peter McCauley, is the most published, not only scholar, but also medical doctor in his field. When the COVID started, he's the person, I'll send you his interview as well, is actually is written more on the development of this pandemic than anyone else in, all the medical science peer-reviewed articles. He had a number of questions like, why exactly have we pursued vaccine and we have decided that we were not going to provide therapeutic? If somebody tests positive from COVID, we ask them to stay at home for the next 14 days until their condition has worsened. And then we take them to the hospital, put them in ED, and then put the, respirators, the
ventilator.
Ventilator. This is the first time we've ever acted like this. Because the first thing that he was advocating is that we look through the protocols of all the medication that could mitigate the consequence or the symptom of this particular virus. And so early intervention will reduce hospitalization, which is where we started out, sort of flatten the curve. Early intervention of a number of protocols could have dealt with this issue. He has been a treating physician. And so from the data that he has, it says that 85% of people that he treated earlier on recovered with no problems, did not even need hospitalization. I think that there is something that doesn't seem right. If there are protocols, the reason why is data is basically not taken into account is they say, well, it was not done in a controlled environment. His question is, since when does trialed, controlled environment with placebo now trump real data, real experience, or real medical doctors who are treating people day in and day out? And so if we started with early treatment, our TGA has not approved any medication, as far as I know, that would actually give people a treatment protocol so that if somebody was infected with COVID, from the first day when they find somebody's positive, what do? They stay at home, no medication given, nothing given until the disease spreads and start attacking their, major organs. That's not how medicine has always been done.
So I suppose you're saying you find it strange that there's been no effort to try to treat people,
Yes.
rather than to treat people so that they don't develop severe symptoms of
Exactly.
of the disease, but they kind of encourage people just to stay home and hope that the disease will go away. But if it doesn't,
Yes.
when it's worse, then you go to the hospital and you end up going to emergency.
Exactly.
Now, what's your view on the fact that apparently, some doctors have been in the media saying that they treated some patient with chloroquine previously, and that was successful. Maybe not for everyone, but there were some people who were recovering quite well. Then apparently they took that medication away, and then there's the latter one. I don't even remember what it's called, which was still helping people, and that also has been taken away. Why do you think that is happening? Do you see some sort of um, scheme behind this, that people just want to promote the vaccine, or what's your view on that?
I think as far as I go, is just to ask the question. I don't suppose or I don't assume anything. For example, um, let's say so the protocol you're talking about is hydroxychloroquine,
Yeah.
Zithromax, zinc, vitamin C, and vitamin B3. So this is a protocol that a lot of medical doctors have been basically, while all the debate was happening politically, when a medical doctor has got somebody who comes and they have an issue, they have to treat them. So they tried a number of I've actually watched some of the doctors who were talking of ivermectin. And we have a number of politicians in Australia who have been trying to push the TGA to at least put together a trial to see whether any of this protocol could be helpful. Like, that is just simply a question of rationality. The TGA response of the TGA is like, nobody submitted that to us. Well, unless somebody submitted to us, then we can't look at it. Well, why don't our government submit it to the TGA to say, can you check if there is any protocol, whether it's hydroxy, whether it's zinc, Zithromax, or whether it is ivermectin, vitamin C, vitamin B3. Can you check so we can see that there's at least a protocol? Everything is hell-bent toward the vaccination. And so the question is, why? Now, I don't have the answer. And when you ask the question, you don't get given the answer. And so I'm not saying there's some scheme. I'm not going to sort of, theorize that there is some conspiracy of government. I'm not saying that. But as a rational person, it doesn't make sense. It does not make sense. For example, whenever you present that data like Dr. Macaulay presented, they get told, well, no, that evidence doesn't count because it was not controlled trials. When I got to the Congo here, my little brother, who works for the United Nations, had contracted COVID. Okay, he contracted COVID. He's a young fella, 42 years old, and he got given hydroxychloroquine. He got given vitamin C, but here in the Congo, that medication, hydroxychloroquine, I grew up on it. I've suffered malaria 12 times in my life. And that is a medication I took for malaria. When the government at home in Victoria and across the board decided that this medication was unsafe and was poisonous, listed it literally under poison. You can imagine my bewilderment as a human being. It doesn't mean that I'm out of my mind to ask the question. This is the medication. My brother's just taken it now. He's back to work here in the Congo. Now, when you present that kind of evidence, you get dismissed that it's anecdotal. That is, it's the answer is that's anecdotal evidence. And it doesn't matter whether this is Peter Macaulay with 6,000 patients that have recovered, it's anecdotal because it was not controlled, funded by, either John Hopkins or Oxford University or with controlled environment with the, placebo effect. Well, so for those reasons and more, I think that I would wait until I have, confidence that the risk of the virus itself, outweighs the risk of the vaccine as it's been provided. In my view,
go ahead.
In my view, there are non-long-term risk, and also I'm going to go as far as the suppression of the adverse reaction to the vaccine as it is viewed. Our media never talk about it. You will be hard-pressed to see on any of our media stories of people who have taken the vaccine and have gotten sick and they've had, myocarditis or any inflammation of any other organs, or whether it is blood clots. You don't see it on the news. All we see is somebody comes say it's safe, it's safe, it's safe, it's safe. It's like this refrain that doesn't stop. You could say it's safe, but we have had these issues, so that people can make their mind up. But the idea that we're going to lock you out, even though you have a reasonable question, I think it is turn our government into, at the risk of becoming totalitarian.
Okay. And I suppose Well, you're saying the risk of catching the virus and suffering from it is not, in your view, bigger than the risk of potentially the long-term consequences of the vaccination.
Yes.
Given the number of people who have died all around the earth, all around
Yeah.
the world,
Yeah.
don't you think that it's probably maybe better to take the vaccine and then not take it?
Now think about it this way: the data bears it out. The data bears it out. If you go on the, the website that monitors all the number of cases versus the number of deaths, it is true that people have died from COVID. There is no question asked. I have a friend of mine in South Africa who died from COVID. One, a pastor. One was affected with COVID, passed away, and the other one who had caught the COVID at the same time, under the same circumstances, has lived it, has survived it. I don't want anybody to say, well, that pastor doesn't believe that COVID is dangerous and is killing people. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying here that we have enough data now to know that the mortality rate of COVID is not, no one can even tell you that it's 10% mortality rate. No, the mortality rate is 1%, or if you really want to stretch it out, it's 2%. That's number one. So 98% of people who catch COVID survive it. That's the first step there to remember. So I'm not saying that COVID is not there. I'm also saying that the data bears it out. Every time when you hear on the news, for example, in New South Wales, cases when we hear somebody died of COVID, when you look at the data, whether the data produced by the CDC or the data produced by our TGA, you will notice that the people who have died are of 65 and over. Now, there are cases of people who have died who were younger, but you will have to check and see they have comorbidity. That comorbidity is a central point. They have comorbidity and they are already old. Now, our life expectancy in Australia is a 74. Okay, so when somebody who's 82 years old died with COVID, when you see on the media, it is COVID has taken a life, but they don't tell you which life, what was to be expected, and so on and so forth. The flu, I'm not saying COVID is the flu. I don't want anybody to sort of misunderstand me. The flu does take a number of people's lives yearly. And by the way, interesting enough, the death from the flu last year and this year has been really down. Why? Because of the lockdowns and social distancing. I get that. So I'm saying that the justification for the overemphasized fear that people are going to be dying of COVID basically, dismisses the data we have that 98% of people who get COVID will survive it. And so what we could have done policy-wise was to protect the most vulnerable. Especially think about children are not at the risk with COVID. And so the idea that we can not only vaccinate, everyone, including children, now it's all the way to 12 years old. When we say in Australia 80% of people vaccinated, that include 12 years old. Now we had a case of in New South Wales where the health minister ushered, children who are going to do testing. You haven't seen it in our regular media, where a young person died upon being vaccinated within hours. If
Okay.
those,
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Finish your line of thought.
So what I'm trying to say here is, I am skeptical based on the government's reaction and the government heavy-handed pursuit of trying to get everybody jabbed. Start to say no job, no job. No job, no job, no going to restaurant, certain venues. Bendigo, where I live, I was reading in the Bendigo Advertiser that the state government is gone to speak to the Bendigo Council, and the Bendigo Council is open to be the regional, it's the largest regional city to trial vaccine passport. In other words,
and that's what I was going to ask you before we sort of finish with this and then go with your actual travel experience.
Yes.
That whole sort of vaccination it's not made mandatory yet, but everything is pointing to the government wanting people to be sort of cornered and have to take a vaccine if they want to live normal life.
Yes, sir, exactly.
What's your view on that?
Well, my views is that the government, I think, to this stage, the prime minister, recognized this. He said they cannot pass a law to mandate vaccine. I think I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I think our constitution makes it hard for the government to be able to pass such mandate. So what therefore the prime minister and the government has done is to try to enroll businesses to say, well, businesses, you can lock out anyone who is not vaccinated. And it is basically a way of pressuring people. You can mandate vaccination. You can mandate that your employers get vaccination. They want the airline to mandate that you can't fly unless you have vaccination. And you have to present a vaccination card. So the government is wanting to pass through businesses to do this. And so, in a way, it is quite extraordinary. Businesses don't get to make the rules. Businesses don't get to tell citizens what citizens should do, what substance they should be injected in their body or not. And there is another looming legal challenge. When the law was passed to give immunity to the vaccine producers, that those laws never included businesses. So right now, if the government continued to encourage businesses to mandate vaccine, if somebody took a vaccine because the business, their employer mandated it, if something went wrong, that business will be liable legally. I believe so. I haven't seen any text that say they immunized for mandating that. So, the government is putting businesses in these very, very dangerous territories. And now, as I'm talking to you, there's a growing of businesses across Australia who do not want to discriminate. We don't want to create a medical apartheid. What do you think practically? If somebody like me who hasn't taken the vaccine, I can't work, I can't feed my family because I won't have the money, and so I can't go to the shop, I can't go to a restaurant. What are we exactly trying to do? Do we want to sort of cold-bloodedly and slowly just terminate people who don't take the vaccine? What are we trying to do? How far is the government prepared for people who are not vaccinated, who still have strong objections, to not be able to live in society anymore?
Yeah, that's a fair question, and I suppose that the future will tell. Many of these issues will be, I suppose, we will see how they pan out, because most likely they will end up in court, and we'll see what the court, the high court says when eventually some people challenge some of these mandates, because in some industries such as aged care, and one of the viewers, Abu Leila, is mentioning it. It says it's already mandatory in aged care industry, where the government has sort of, without making any laws, they've kind of allowed the operators in that industry to ask everyone working to vaccinate themselves, and that's the tendency that is going. So I suppose we've also seen it, as Abu Leila is also mentioning, from Qantas CEO Alan Joyce, who has also asked all the people to mandate, even in the police. I saw something in Queensland, I think. The chief commissioner has requested that all members get vaccinated and all that sort of thing. That's going to go into some sort of real legal mess, isn't it? I'm assuming.
Yes, and I can even. I'm a man of church. The government's overreach is gone too far. For example, the Assemblies of God Australia have received most of their pastors. I'm not part of the Assemblies of God, but I've got friends there. They've received a letter that the government is underhandedly working to basically tell the churches that for churches to open back, they must therefore only let in the vaccinated. It's as though the government has gone as far as to tell us who should come to Christ, who should be discipled within our churches. Now, the Assemblies of God are going to be fighting this. We are a church, and we don't subscribe. No one tells us who exactly is Jesus, who's going to come to be looked after as a church, as a community. We look after people who are on the street, people who are homeless. We look after people who are sick. We look after people after they're born. We look after people when they die. I don't care even if somebody, I can tell you as a pastor, I would go if somebody was terminally ill and even they had a contagious disease. This is now Christian theology. I wouldn't be terrified by death, because Christianity is not built on the idea that death is final. So for the government to think that they can now mandate that only the vaccinated should be the one who are going to be let come to church, they have just simply overstepped their mark. People used to say, separation of church and state. Now we have basically the state getting inside the church to tell us what. Now, if a friend of mine, a pastor, said, well, but maybe the government has got duty of care toward, but the government could say that, okay, well, I have the gathering of the vaccinated and the gathering of the unvaccinated. Or the government might end up with a situation where businesses whose owners are not vaccinated, don't want to be vaccinated, then they'll open the doors to the unvaccinated. Will the government be happy to have a parallel running system and economy of the vaccinated and the unvaccinated? I can guarantee you no. The government will impose its will to say everybody should be vaccinated. And if you run a business that welcome the unvaccinated, you'll be either sanctioned in some ways. Churches that run the churches for unvaccinated will be sanctioned in some ways. This is what I'm saying. The overreach is becoming totalitarian.
Yeah. All right. I get the point. And obviously, we will see how things develop. Every day, we're kind of getting new thing from either the government or the businesses who are coming up with all these measures, but challenge the option for people to challenge these laws is still available. All right, now let's talk about your trip. I mean, when you told me a couple of weeks or so that you were traveling to the Congo, and I asked, and I knew that you were obviously someone who had reservations on the vaccine, so you didn't take the vaccine. So is it possible even actually to travel, let alone to travel without being vaccinated?
Well,
yes, it is. Tell me how you managed to pull that off.
The answer to that question is I'm here. I'm not in Australia. I'm in the Congo right now, and I'm not vaccinated. Okay, I have my reservation about vaccination. And so most countries, there are fewer countries that have mandated that if to travel you have to have the vaccine. Australia is not even mandated that to get out of Australia you need a vaccine. No, the government hasn't mandated that. If it had, I wouldn't be here. So to get out of Australia, first of all, you apply to get an exemption from the government, and so you have to give compelling reasons. I was coming here for the reasons of work. As you know, I am a pastor of a church, and I look after a number of churches. Our headquarters is here in Kinshasa. So even the church that I'm a pastor in Australia is an outshoot, if you will. It's an outpost and a church plant of the Central Mission here. So I'm one of the highest, ranking official in our community of churches. And so I had been asked to come to the headquarters to fulfill my duties. So it's work related, and my duties of opening an English service here, and my duty of training and development for our team of leaders and pastors and business leaders and people from across our community. And so that's the first number one reason. So I had to provide all the documentations of my of the task that I was going to do here. The second thing is that I have my family here. My children born in Australia hadn't seen their grandparents. They hadn't seen their cousins and the aunties and uncles. And my dad is 85. And, he was singing the song that, he could be gone any moment from now. And I thought it is extremely important that my kids get to see their grandparents. And so those two reasons I provided to the government. I am going for compassionate reason. I want to see my parents before my dad passes on. And I want also to be able to do my job. So for those reasons, there was no reason why the government would say that I couldn't go. And so because it's not in our laws that the government could say, well, you have the job to do there, but we're not going to let you go. And so I received my exemption. And so I needed to have at least a COVID test done so in Australia, it's from 4 years old and up, you need a COVID test. So we did a COVID test for my my younger one, and then so we also comply with the COVID tests for Doha, for Kenya, and for Congo. And as long as the PCR test was negative, we were good to go. And there are airlines that are happy to actually be flying in and out of Australia pretty much every second day.
Well, apparently, what we're seeing here is that they're saying that by November, they'll probably be instituting a COVID passport, without which you can't board a plane out of Australia. So I don't know if that's exactly what's going to happen, or what do you think if that is made legal?
I think that the government will struggle to do it legally. Okay, the government will struggle to pass a law that actually mandate this COVID passport. This is the reason why they're using the QR code and using your, vaccination medical information that the government holds, which within the frame of our laws, if you have not, deliberately say you don't want to share that information, the government therefore
Be
can
private.
share it. So they want therefore to link it with the QR code, so that when your QR code, and then they can say, okay, well, this person is vaccinated. If you opt out, they will have no way to basically find out whether you're vaccinated or not. And so in that sense, the government is pushing businesses to do it. Now, I mean, it's okay. Alan Joyce is all gang-ho about doing this. But all the other airlines are not subjected to Mr. Joyce's thinking. And what is going to happen actually is, yes, if there is an airline that take in vaccinated and unvaccinated people, that airline will have a lot more prominence than our Qantas. So he's making a very dangerous business decision. He's mixing now the business and his politics. Here's the last thing that I will say. When I left Melbourne, the airport was like a ghost town. Then I landed in Doha. People were flying from all over the world coming via Doha. I met people from Texas, met people from the UK, people coming from Uganda, so from Kenya. People were like, Doha was this major center. And in Doha's airport, all businesses were open. Nobody even started pointing out, say, hey, are you vaccinated? No. So businesses were open. Why are we killing our own economy? It's just mind-boggling. So, Doha was a huge center of activities. And see the other thing that I noticed. On the news, it was not always the number of cases. There were all sorts of other news.
Yes.
The media at home are so focused on counting the number of cases. It's like breaking news, number of cases, breaking news. It instills tremendous fear in people.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I landed in the Congo, less developed country than Australia. But when I got here, people are going about their daily business. Since I've been here, on Sunday, I spoke across 3 services, and people are going around about their businesses. We must learn to live with this virus. Why? Because even countries that are 80% vaccinated, like Israel, or even Singapore, just across the pond, have seen a spike in the Delta variant. And 60% of the people hospitalized were doubly vaccinated in Singapore, I was reading today. And I was reading in the BBC report today that the UK has dropped the idea of COVID vaccines for entering in venues. What is it about us, Australia, that we want to pursue this 80% vaccination, even though we know that in Israel it's not actually producing the no more COVID? People are still getting infected. In Singapore, the same. In the UK, they've looked at it and go, well, we're going to drop this COVID vaccine passport idea. So I don't think that our government is thinking straight about these things.
Well, you don't think the government is thinking straight? I'm sure there are people who would say, well, that's probably not right because they wanting to protect Australia. But and then again, how far would you go in protecting Australia if that is killing the economy? And also, by the way, for me, one thing that I find strange is counting all these numbers of people who are tested positive. Actually, I wonder how much how important it is, because ultimately it's those who end up in hospital and dying that probably is more important, because the majority of people who get positive tests actually are either asymptomatic or they don't suffer any severe symptoms. So I don't know to
Yeah.
what extent it serves to do all this tally of positive cases. What do you think?
That's exactly right. Think about it. On the news, all we see is number of cases. And so
Yeah,
once somebody get a case, they has to be isolated. And often after the isolation, 14 days they're out, nothing happened. Not that's it. They've gone
yeah.
out. And so how many ended up in a hospital, how many died? We just count the cases and then we lock down. Under the idea, because we're using computer modeling, that according to the computer model, if we didn't lock people down, then it'll spread, we'll have more deaths. Well, we know computer modelings have been wrong in a number of cases, in a
Yes,
number of things. So it's good to go with computer modeling. I'm not disparaging computer modeling, but also to account for the data that we have in the real world. And so if we do that, then we'll be a lot more balanced in our policy approach to this question. So I think that being just simply, this is actually, it could be right-hearted to do what the government is doing, but it's wrong-headed. Now, I don't really want to say that there is wrong motives here. That's why I'm saying the government might be right-hearted, but wrong-headed. Why? Because they do what is called selective memory of evidence. When we get countries that are progressing in number of people vaccinated, we get touted like, look, as compared to all the other numbers, other countries. That's positive. But then with those countries that are, high numbers vaccinated, when they start to experience, COVID infection, breakthrough cases, our politicians and our media is quiet on it.
mm-hmm.
To me, that tells me it's no longer the question of the evidence here, it's a question of narrative. And narratives will always discard the evidence that is against the narrative. That is a
Absolutely.
problem.
Selective memory. Okay. Reverend Samuel Tshisekedi, thank you very much for your time to African Knowledge to share your insight with regards to vaccine, and we know that you are in Kinshasa doing a lot of work, and you're a busy man, but you took your time to talk to us and share your experience, not just about the safety of COVID, as well as the experience to travel out of Australia in this lockdown context, and seeing what else is happening in the world that may be here in Australia we don't get to see much. So we appreciate your time and hope we will have another opportunity sometime soon to talk to you again about any number of things that is relevant either to COVID or other issues relating to the community. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you. It's an opportunity and a privilege to have been part of your program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for those watching, as usual, we would encourage you to share the video, like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, click on that notification bell so you get automatically notified when we're publishing new content. And if you have something to share that adds value to the community, we encourage you to contact us so we can have a look at a way to bring you across. Until next time, stay safe and stay blessed. Thank you.